ecology, more specifically political and historical ecology, into ethnoprimatological research. As we've been learning, there's the population of the African green vervet monkey in St. Kitts, as well as Nevis, its sister island in Barbados. The vervets arrived over 350 years ago. The common lore in St. Kitts right now is that they arrived as the pets of French merchant settlers. Of course, there were also colonialists bringing slaves from West Africa, and there's lots of stories about how they got to be so populous on the island, certainly by escaping, perhaps by being released, supposedly to compete with slaves who had escaped at plantations. But regardless of how this has happened, the population has increased at an extraordinary level. And there's documentation that starting around the 1950s, farmers have had to actively guard against crop damage from vervet monkeys through presence on their farm, as well as through hunting. Given the longevity of this issue, it was surprising and nice to me to realize that it had not been systematically investigated until I initiated my dissertation research in 2010. I came to St. Kitts as Trudy Turner's graduate student. Trudy and Jennifer and colleagues had gone to St. Kitts to trap for this larger genetic project we've been hearing about, and they trapped 600 to 800 vervet monkeys and then set them free. And the trappers lost their mind about this. You have to take them with you, we hate them, kill them, do anything, but don't put them back. And so at the time, I'd been planning to do my dissertation research in South Africa, and I got a one-line email from Trudy, I think you should switch your dissertation field site to St. Kitts. And 6 months later, I was living there. So it presented itself as an ideal location for an ethnoprimatological study. I looked at this problem, the monkey problem, as the St. Kitts farmers call it, from three perspectives. The first of these was primatology. I'm not going to be speaking at all about this, but I wanted to just introduce it. What I did was I developed a predictive model of farms likely to experience crop damage by vervet monkeys based on environmental variables and behavior of farmers. You can see here, these are the boundaries of the 65 farms around St. Kitts that I randomly selected and monitored crop damage monthly for 12 sequential months. You can see here some images of some of the crop damage that I documented. Damage to citrus. This is cabbage. The monkeys eat out the heart of the cabbage. Pumpkin. I mean, nothing is really outside of the range of vervet interest. They especially like watermelon and cucumbers, sweet fruits, but I've seen them eat onions, chives, many different crops. So the second stage of my analysis was from an ethnoprimatological standpoint. Ethnoprimatologists consider humans and primates as interconnected, and so they look at the perspectives of both of these groups as well as how they impact each other. It's essentially a combination of primatology and cultural anthropology. Within cultural anthropology, it pulls a lot of its theoretical base from human-animal studies and studies of the nature-culture divide. And from this, we now take the perspective that quote-unquote normal primate behaviors may often be the result of anthropogenic impacts. And more broadly, with regard to the nature-culture divide, this means that human impacts on the environment should not be viewed as perturbations of natural states. Humans and their environments have been mutually coexisting for millions of years, and it's very possible to tease apart the specific dynamics of this. So from this, we can infer that when we're looking at this behavior of the vervet monkeys, we must consider them in a very broad and dynamic way. So the first stage of analysis allowed me to understand that the current crop-raiding behaviors of the vervet monkeys are impacted by these environmental variables and behaviors of the farmers. This is happening at this moment. However, I was interested in using this ethnoprimatological analysis to look at why the patterns of cultivation are happening in St. Kitts. Why are the farmers planting the way they are and where they are? And then also, how does the crop-raiding behavior on the part of the monkeys impact the behavior of the humans as well as their perception of these animals? In order to evaluate this problem from an ethnoprimatological standpoint, I interviewed all the farmers associated with the 64 farms that I've investigated for crop damage during the same period of time that I was monitoring their farm quantitatively. I also initiated conversations with anyone who was willing to talk to me about monkeys, which was many people in St. Kitts. Almost everybody has an opinion about monkeys, but I specifically focused my conversations with members of the agricultural community, more broadly speaking. I found three main conclusions from the second stage of analysis. The first of these is that the relationships between humans and vervets have drastically increased since 2005. This is when the sugar industry closed. You can see here on this map from McGuire 1974 that vervet monkeys in 1970 to 1972 were limited to the steep forested interior of the island as well as the southeast peninsula. These are two areas of the island that are not good at growing sugarcane. The steep forest on the interior just is not the right terrain for cultivating the crops, and then the southeast peninsula is quite dry and thus not appropriate for growing sugarcane. So every inch of arable land was taken up growing sugar. So thus there were lots of tractors associated with the estates, many individuals working on the estates, and in addition, these estates employed rangers whose job was to actively protect farms against crop damage by shooting monkeys themselves, as well as just shooting at them to keep them from coming onto the crops. Additionally, there's always been a very big problem with food imports in St. Kitts because of this monoculture. Thus, either former slaves or workers for these estates were allocated small plots of land to grow diversified crops, and these farms were located on what I'm calling the forest farm boundary, just below where the forest ends and above the cane. These farmers were on their farms from dawn until dusk. I learned all of this just by talking to farmers. This oral history is very well known in the country. They were on their farms all day to protect from monkeys. They used dogs and they used traps, and they also planted and maintained a lot of fruit trees that served as an important food source for monkeys. In 2005, the sugar industry collapsed. The government has owned all of the sugar lands since 1970s, which I'll get into in a minute, and thus they allocated plots of this former sugar land to anyone interested in farming. But of course, these were, the preferred pieces would be much closer to home. These farmers were walking all the way up the mountain. So now the farmers are working close to home. They're not keeping the monkeys out of the cane, those farmers themselves, as well as all of the infrastructure associated with the sugar industry. Nobody's maintaining the fruit trees, and hurricanes have destroyed significant amounts of these trees, which are not being replanted. So thus, the monkeys are coming out of the mountain at an alarming rate, and they're finding food on the farms that were the focus of my study. Second, I found that the cultural conceptualization of vervet monkeys has changed pre-2005 to post-2005. Before 2005, it was very rare for a normal Kittitian, a non-farmer, to see a living monkey. So they were pests to this small group of farmers, but they were food to the majority of Kittitians. They would say, I just saw them in the pot as food. Since 2005, monkeys are being observed really for the first time by many of these people, and they're seeing for the first time how human-like they are, the way they hold their babies, the way they nurse their babies. I don't know how they found out that they get their periods, but this is like a huge deal to them. And so since this recognition of this, they have decided many of them are no longer interested in eating vervet monkeys. So they're leaving, they're now boundary crossers. They're boundary crossers because they're crossing this human-animal boundary. They're realizing they're much more similar to us than they thought previously. And they're also crossing this forest farm boundary, leaving the forest and coming into the agricultural land. And I'm arguing that this is so unnerving to them because they're bridging this so-called nature-culture divide and leaving nature and coming into their cultural space. Third, I found, the third result that I found related to the way monkeys are discussed as pests. So first, even though I was there to study crop damage from monkeys and other animals, the farmers focused their frustrations on problems with the government, problems with getting a tractor to harrow their land, problems with getting seeds, marketing their crops once they were grown, and this also extended to problems with animals. They expect the government to fix the problems with animals. Monkeys are really unique pests in St. Kitts for a number of reasons. First is because they don't have owners, so many of the other animals that are raiding crops have somebody that they can blame, and these individuals do not. And then also due to this intelligent behavior on the part of the animals, there's the feeling that there's nothing that they can do. They're too smart. They're going to outsmart with everything that they do to protect their crops, and that's the only way to the only way to stop this problem is to kill monkeys. Additionally, they are afraid because of this intelligent-like behavior. They expect the monkeys to act like humans and with human-like manners in their property. So thus, when the monkey takes one bite out of 20 different crops, they're wasteful and they're spiteful rather than eating one whole cucumber. So this level of analysis builds on the primatological analysis by telling me the history of the problem and showing that it's really the severe crop damage, not just the likelihood. They're willing to share their crops with monkeys. It's this wasteful behavior that upsets the farmers and contributes to this negative perception. And it also supports the literature from broader anthropological studies of conflict with wildlife, that when problems with the government are being projected onto wildlife, it's the result of a feeling of marginality on the part of those experiencing conflict. I'm arguing that this feeling of marginality is a result of a lack of land ownership and the power associated with owning land. Thus, I analyze this problem from a third level, that of environmental anthropology, more specifically political and historical ecology, looking at the relationships between people and their environment from a historical and global perspective. What I found is that there's an incredibly unique relationship between Kittians and their environment due to this lack of land ownership. St. Kitts is very good at growing sugar, so they held on for a very long time. And many other colonial counterparts, including their sister island of Nevis, individual farmers own their land because the former sugar owners gave the land to their former slaves for purchase. The literature on Kittitian farmers is that due to this lack of land ownership, they're an underdeveloped, individualistic group that has no ties to farming or love for their land. Due to this lack of land ownership, there's an intense feeling of insecurity on the part of the farmers. Many of them are not paying for their land as they are supposed to, and thus there's this fear that the government is going to come in and take their land away. And there are instances where farmers have been moved to put in development projects. This lack of land ownership also leads to a lot of discussion about the levels of cooperation among farmers, the future of farming as it's seen as degrading work, slave work, youth want to get involved in agriculture. And there's a lot of concern because the current government is selling off and mortgaging large portions of this land to make up for the intense debt that it accrued by staying in sugar for so long. But what I found is that there's a lot of heterogeneity on the part of the farmers and the government with regard to this issue. Many farmers do feel powerless and that everyone's in it for themselves and that there's no future in farming, but many other farmers have very long ties and histories to specific plots of land. There's many cooperative societies being developed, certain high schools that have great young agricultural programs, and there is this strong sense of pride about the land and real concern about losing it to these foreign investors. The government is also highly heterogeneous in the sense that the government is in complete disarray right now. I can't get into that, but one of the major political debates is whether this land should be used for agriculture or for tourism. So looking at this third level of analysis shows that this human-animal conflict in St. Kitts is really a reflection of the broader human-environment issues, and thus this work serves as an example of incorporating the human-environment relationship in addition to the human-animal relationship in ethnoprimatological research. Doing this has shown me that the problem in St. Kitts is exacerbated due to the fact that farmers don't want to invest heavily in their farm or these expensive preventative measures because they're not sure how long they're going to be able to be working there. I'm working really closely with the St. Kitts government on this issue. Aside from debts and food security, this is one of the biggest problems that the country's facing right now. I'd hope to have some time to discuss. I probably don't, but I hope that either after this or at the reception or at some point I can speak to some of you about what to do about this issue. My next step is to estimate the island's monkey population in a systematic way. I would not be surprised if there are 60, 70, 80,000 monkeys on this 70 square mile island. I think it's probably the biggest ratio of humans to monkeys anywhere in the world. If I can prove this to be true, we should really initiate perhaps a sterilization program. I'm working with the vet school on this, but I'm a little bit torn in the sense that I think maybe it makes more sense to serve as a natural predator and simply cull certain animals in specific areas that grow crops, protect those crops, divert the monkeys elsewhere with alternative food. But yet I don't really want to kill monkeys, so I'm very torn about this issue. I'd love to talk with you about the ethics of culling monkeys, whether we should use those monkeys for food for people. It's a very touchy subject, but this is one instance where I do feel like it should be considered a possibility. We can test the food for safety with the vet school and utilize it as a food source for these farmers. Thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge the field assistants that helped me count graded tomatoes and also some funding sources and the St. Kitts